The first time I heard the laughter, I almost didn't recognize it for what it was. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laughter that comes from a place of absolute certainty, the kind that says we have already decided about you and nothing you do will change that. I was standing in the observation bay of the conclave station Meridian 7, a floating diplomatic hub the size of a small moon, orbiting a gas giant called Veth in the outer reach. The station had been built by the Voakai Collective about 600 years before humans had even figured out how to smelt iron properly. The ceilings were 30 meters high. The corridors hummed with a low-frequency vibration that the Voakai said was soothing, but that most humans found deeply unsettling, like standing next to something that was breathing but shouldn't be. I was there as part of the Earth Diplomatic Observer Corps. Fancy title. What it really meant was that I was one of 12 humans allowed on the station at any given time, and our job was mostly to sit quietly in the back of meetings we weren't invited to and take notes on things we weren't fully cleared to understand yet. My name is Corvin Hale. I was 34 years old at the time. I'd been in the Observer Corps for 6 years, long enough to stop being amazed by the architecture and start being annoyed by the politics. And that morning, if you can call anything morning, on a station where the artificial lighting cycled on a 40-hour Voakai schedule, I heard the laughter. It came from the upper observation deck. 3 Voakai diplomats, 2 Shendra trade counselors, and a Grovian military attaché were standing around a display projection that showed a schematic of the Sol system. Earth, our little blue dot. One of the Voakai was speaking in that fluid, almost musical language of theirs, and I didn't need a full translation because I'd been studying Voakai Standard long enough to catch the key words. Primitive, reactive, unstable, emotional. And then the Grovian said something that made all of them laugh. My translator earpiece gave me a half-second delay, and then the translation came through in that flat, synthesized voice that stripped all tone and left only meaning. They have been traveling between stars for less than 40 of their years, and they sent us a diplomat who brought a handwritten letter, on paper, made from a tree. More laughter. I stood there holding my datapad and I thought, okay, fine, go ahead. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that within 72 hours, every single being on that station would understand exactly what humanity was capable of. And none of them would be laughing. Let me back up a little, because you need to understand what the political situation was like on Meridian 7 before you can understand what happened. The conclave station existed because the galaxy, as it turns out, is absolutely full of intelligent life and absolutely terrible at getting along with itself. The conclave was the closest thing the outer reach had to a governing body, a loose coalition of 12 spacefaring species who met every few years to negotiate trade routes, resolve territorial disputes, and generally try to stop each other from blowing things up. Humanity had been granted observer status about 18 months before I arrived. Not full membership, not voting rights, just the right to sit in a room and watch other people make decisions that affected us. The Voakai had pushed for it. They were the oldest species in the conclave, ancient, elongated beings with silver-gray skin and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They moved slowly, spoke carefully, and lived for somewhere between 400 and 800 years depending on which source you trusted. They'd been watching Earth for about 3 centuries, apparently, and had concluded that we were interesting in the way that a fire is interesting, worth monitoring from a safe distance, potentially useful, potentially catastrophic. The Grovian, on the other hand, had been openly opposed to human observer status from the beginning. They were a militarized species, not brutal, exactly, but deeply, philosophically convinced that a civilization's worth was measured by its capacity for organized violence. They had a fleet that made Earth's entire space program look like a paper boat on the ocean. They were tall, broad, with dense blue-gray hide and 4 arms. the upper two of which ended in something between a hand and a claw. They moved like soldiers even when they weren't in uniform. They looked at humans and saw small, soft, slow, short-lived creatures who had wandered into galactic politics by accident and would probably wander back out of it just as quickly. Their attaché on Meridian 7 was a male named Crovedeath. He was 7.5 feet tall and had a voice like gravel rolling down a metal ramp. He'd been dismissive of humans since before I arrived, but lately it had gotten worse. A month earlier, Earth's representative to the Conclave, a soft-spoken career diplomat named Myra Solis, had made a proposal in open session about a new trade corridor through the Velder Nebula. Crovedeath had interrupted her mid-sentence to say, in perfectly translated standard, that the Conclave should not be expected to pause its serious business to hear from civilizations that had only recently stopped killing each other over which direction their rivers flowed. Nobody had corrected him. Myra had finished her proposal anyway, with a kind of quiet dignity that I still think about sometimes. The proposal was tabled indefinitely. So that was the environment. And into that environment, 3 days before everything changed, came the Thresh. If you don't know about the Thresh, and most people outside the outer reach still don't, because the Conclave managed to suppress most of the public record of what happened, let me explain. The Thresh were not a species in the usual sense. They were more like, how do I describe this? Imagine a collective entity, a distributed intelligence that had, at some point in the distant past, been a biological species, but had long since merged with a form of technology so deeply that the distinction between the organism and the machine had stopped mattering. They moved through space in vessels that were also, in some sense, themselves. They communicated through modulated gravitational pulses that had to be translated into sound waves for most species to interpret. They were not aggressive exactly, but they were acquisitive. They collected resources. They collected systems. And when they encountered a new resource or system they wanted, they issued what they called a claim. A claim was exactly what it sounded like. A formal declaration that a given system, planet, station, or entity was now considered Thresh property. 3 days before everything fell apart, a Thresh vessel appeared at the edge of the Veth system and transmitted a claim. Not on a planet, not on a station. On Meridian 7 itself. The reaction on the station was, I want to say, controlled panic, but that gives the Conclave species too much credit. It was closer to badly disguised terror dressed up as bureaucratic procedure. Emergency sessions were called. Delegations were recalled from their quarters at all hours. The 40-hour lighting cycle got abandoned entirely, and the station shifted to a flat, constant white that made everyone look slightly unwell. I started seeing Volkai diplomats in the corridors at what my body insisted was 3 in the morning, their mirror eyes reflecting the strip lights, speaking in rapid, clipped tones that my translator earpiece could barely keep up with. The Thresh claim was, technically speaking, not unprecedented. They had claimed inhabited stations before. They had claimed inhabited worlds before. The standard response was negotiation. The Thresh would accept certain resource concessions, certain access rights, certain transfer of technological data in exchange for withdrawing the claim. The problem was that the last time a Conclave species had tried to negotiate a Thresh claim withdrawal, the negotiations had taken 11 years and had ultimately resulted in the loss of 3 systems that the species in question had considered absolutely non-negotiable. So there was a real and immediate question hanging over the station. What do we offer them? What do we give up? And who decides? And underneath that question, quieter but even more urgent, how long do we have before the Thresh vessel moves from claiming to taking? The answer to that last one, it turned out, was 72 hours. I found out about the Thresh claim the same way I found out about most things on that station, through Myra Solis, who had a gift for knowing things before she was officially supposed to know them. She came to the observer's quarters at what my body clock said was about 7 in the morning, knocked twice, and when I opened the door she handed me a cup of something that was almost but not entirely unlike coffee and said, "Thresh claim. On the station. We've got 3 days." I stared at her. She was a small woman, Myra, maybe 5'4", with dark eyes and the kind of face that looked younger than it was until you looked at it for a while, and then suddenly looked exactly the right age. She'd been a diplomat for 22 years. She had a way of delivering terrible news with a kind of calm precision that I'd always found simultaneously reassuring and slightly unnerving. "They're claiming the station," I said. "The station and everything in it." She came inside without being invited, which was also very Myra, and sat down on the edge of the bunk. "The conclave is in emergency session right now. We're not invited." "Of course we're not. The Thresh vessel is holding at 40,000 kilometers, well outside weapons range for the station's defense grid. It's broadcasting the claim on a loop." She paused. "It's a big ship, Corvin." I'd seen the preliminary scans. "I know. The Grovian want to fight it." I looked at her. "The Grovian want to fight a Thresh vessel. Krovedeth is in there right now arguing for an immediate military response. He's saying that if the Conclave shows any sign of negotiating, it signals weakness that the Thresh will exploit across every claimed system for the next century." She sipped from her own cup. "He's not wrong about that part, actually. But the Thresh vessel is, we've run the numbers. It's roughly equivalent to having a battle group of about 40 Grovian dreadnoughts. The station has nothing close to that kind of firepower. If the Grovian push for open engagement and it goes wrong, we lose the station. The Conclave loses its primary diplomatic hub, and 11 of the 12 member species lose their entire delegations in one shot." I sat down. "What does the Vorkai say?" "Negotiate, of course. The Vorkai always say negotiate." She put her cup down. "The problem is that the Thresh have already transmitted their opening demand, and it's not resources, it's not technology access." I waited. "They want the station itself," she said, "completely. Every sentient being on board to evacuate within 48 hours, after which Meridian 7 becomes a Thresh processing hub and the Conclave loses its only neutral meeting point in the outer reach." She paused. "Which, functionally, means the Conclave dissolves. 6 centuries of diplomatic infrastructure. Gone." I let that settle for a moment. "And the Conclave emergency session is trying to figure out how to respond," I said. "Yes, without us." I looked at her. She was looking at her cup. "Myra," I said, "what are you thinking?" She looked up, and there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen before in 6 years of working alongside her. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something closer to resolution. The look of someone who has decided to do something that cannot be undone. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that we've been sitting in the back of rooms for 18 months and nobody has taken us seriously for a single day of it. I'm thinking that every species on this station has looked at us and seen something small and new and unimportant. I'm thinking that we have been told, in 100 different ways, that we don't belong here." She stood up. "And I'm thinking that might be about to change. I want to tell you about what happened over the next 12 hours because it matters. Not the big dramatic moments, those come later, but the quiet things, the human things." While the Conclave delegations were locked in their emergency session, the 12 humans on Meridian 7 did something that I later came to understand was very characteristically human in a way that didn't have an equivalent in any of the other species' behavioral profiles. We got to work. Not because anyone asked us to. Not because we had authority or clearance or a seat at the table. We got to work because there was a problem and we'd spotted an angle on it, and sitting still while something fixable was breaking felt physically unbearable. I went to the station's open access data library. information the conclave made available to all observer species, and I started pulling everything I could find on Thresh claim history. Historical negotiations, precedents, outcomes, resource demands. There were 47 documented Thresh claims in the conclave's records. I read all 47. Meanwhile, two of the other human observers, a woman named Declan Foss, who was an aerospace engineer turned diplomat's aide, and a young man named Joseph Merman who had been a trauma surgeon before he joined the Corps, were doing something different. They were running through the station schematics that were available in the public architectural records, and they were looking at the station's defensive infrastructure with a very specific question in mind. A question nobody had thought to ask. Solis herself was doing something I didn't find out about until later. She was trying to get a message out to Earth, not through conclave communication channels. Those were locked down in the emergency. Through the Observer Corps-owned low-bandwidth diplomatic relay, a channel so limited that it could only transmit about 200 words per transmission. She was trying to get a message to people at home who might know something that we didn't. At the 14-hour mark, Foss came to find me in the data library. She was a compact woman with close-cropped gray hair and the particular focused energy of someone who has spent years solving problems that couldn't be solved until she solved them. She sat down across from me without preamble and put her datapad on the table between us. "I found something," she said. I looked at the schematic on her datapad. It was the station's primary resonance array, a system originally designed for long-range communications, but that also, according to a footnote in a 600-year-old Volkai engineering document, had a secondary function as a gravitational pulse dampener in case of stellar event proximity. "Gravitational pulse dampener," I said slowly. "The Thresh communicate through modulated gravitational pulses," she said. I looked at her. "You think we can interfere with their communications?" "Not block them, not permanently. But if you looked at the frequency bands they're using to broadcast the claim," she tapped her datapad, "and you cross-referenced with the resonance array's operational parameters, we could introduce noise into the signal." "Not just noise," she said. "The right kind of noise, structured interference. It wouldn't stop the claim from being broadcast, but it might make the Thresh vessel believe its own signal was degrading." She paused. "Thresh claims have a validation protocol. The broadcasting vessel has to receive its own signal back within a certain window to confirm the claim is active. If the signal appears to degrade, the claim status becomes uncertain," I finished. "They'd have to pause and recalibrate, which would buy us time, not a lot, maybe 18 hours if we're lucky." I stared at the schematic. "Has anyone else figured this out?" "The Volkai built this station," she said. "They know every system on it better than we do, so either they've considered this and decided it's not viable for reasons we're not seeing, or they haven't considered it," I said, "because they're not thinking about the problem the way we are." Foss looked at me steadily. "The Volkai have been in the conclave for 6 centuries, Corvin. They've dealt with Thresh claims before. They have established protocols, established responses, established frameworks." She paused. "Sometimes having established frameworks means you stop looking for new ones." I picked up my datapad. "We need to tell Myra." Solis listened to Foss's explanation with that intense, absolute focus that was one of her most distinctive qualities. The ability to give you the impression that, for the duration of your explanation, you were the only thing in her universe. When Foss finished, Solis was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, "If we do this without authorization, we're interfering with conclave infrastructure during a diplomatic emergency. That's not an observer violation. That's a potential expulsion offense." "Yes," Foss said. "If we go to the conclave and propose it, they'll spend 12 hours debating whether to take us seriously before they even look at the technical specs." "Also yes," Foss said. And if we propose it and they reject it, and then we do it anyway. Corvin figured that part out, Foss said, and looked at me. I've been working through the Thresh precedent files while they talked. In 31 of the 47 documented Thresh claims, I said, the Thresh withdrew the claim before the deadline, not because the Conclave gave them what they wanted, because the claim was disrupted in some way. Technical malfunction, signal interference, stellar interference events. The Thresh have a very specific protocol hierarchy. If a claim can't be formally validated, they don't proceed to acquisition. They withdraw and reinitiate from a position of greater certainty. Solis looked at me. They're systematic. Extremely. Whatever they are now, biological, mechanical, hybrid, their decision-making has a rigid procedural structure. They don't improvise, they follow protocols, and their acquisition protocol requires a validated claim. No validation, no acquisition. So if we introduce interference and their claim validation fails, they should, based on historical precedent, withdraw. And then the Conclave has time to negotiate the terms of a new claim approach from a position that is not 48 hours to evacuation. Solis looked at the wall for a moment, then she looked at Foss, then she looked at me. If this works, she said, and the Conclave finds out what we did, they'll probably be furious, I said. But the station will still be here, Foss added. Another pause, longer this time. I need 2 hours, Solis said. I have one more message I need to send home, and then, she paused. Yosef said he could access the resonance array maintenance terminal through the station's general maintenance access protocols. Observer clearance covers general maintenance access. It's a loophole, a very small loophole. Small enough, Foss said. Those 2 hours were the longest of my life. Not because of fear exactly. I was past fear by that point. It was something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something large. Like standing on a cliff at night, knowing the sea is below you but not being able to see it, and having to decide whether to jump anyway. I went back to the data library and kept reading. And somewhere in the 43rd precedent file, a Thresh claim against a Shendra trading post in the year equivalent to about 1887 on Earth's calendar, I found something that stopped me cold. I read it twice, 3 times. Then I went to find Solis. She was in her quarters, standing over her small communications terminal with her eyes closed and her hands flat on the desk on either side of it, the way she sometimes did when she was thinking through something very carefully. Myra, I said. She opened her eyes. I found something else. She read the file I handed her. Then she sat down very slowly, which was something I had never seen her do before in 6 years. You're sure about this translation, she said. Her voice was perfectly level. I checked it 3 times. The Voakai archivist notation in the file confirms it. In the 43rd precedent file, buried in a footnote to a historical annotation, was a reference to a specific clause in the Thresh's own claim protocol. A clause that the Conclave had apparently been aware of for centuries, but had never successfully invoked, because invoking it required meeting a condition that no Conclave species had ever been able to satisfy. The clause stated that a Thresh claim could be formally challenged, not resisted, not ignored, but formally challenged under Thresh protocol by any entity that could demonstrate what the Thresh called Veth Kala. The translation was approximate. The best rendering in standard was demonstrated capacity for irrational self-sacrifice in defense of a collective. In plainer language, proof that you will die for each other. The Thresh, as I understood it from the precedent files, had a philosophical framework built around the concept of optimization. They were, at their core, rational actors. Every decision they made was the product of probability assessment, resource calculation, expected outcome modeling. They were very nearly incapable of what humans would call irrational behavior, behavior that ran counter to the individual entity's self-preservation. Because of this, they had a deep, almost reverent fascination with species that could override their self-preservation instinct for collective benefit. They considered it, and this was the part that had made me read the paragraph 4 times, the highest expression of organized intelligence. Not weakness, not inefficiency, the highest expression of organized intelligence. Any species that could demonstrate Veth Kala, not describe it, not argue for it, but demonstrate it, could issue a formal claim challenge. Under Thresh Protocol, a formal claim challenge triggered a mandatory review period, during which the claiming vessel was required to withdraw to a distance of no less than 3 light minutes while the challenge was assessed. 3 light minutes. Time. Has this ever been successfully invoked? Solis said quietly. No, I said. Every conclave species that tried to invoke it was evaluated by the Thresh and judged to not qualify. She looked at me. The Thresh would have to agree that the challenge demonstration constitutes genuine Veth Kala. Yes. And they'd be assessing the claim. Yes. So we'd be making a case to the Thresh that we qualify, and they decide whether we're right. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Corvin, what do you think we would need to do to demonstrate it? I've been thinking about that for the last 40 minutes. I don't know exactly, but I think it has to be real, genuine. The Thresh's entire framework is based on probability assessment. They'd know if we staged something. It would have to be something that actually costs something. Solis looked at me for a long moment. Her face was very still. 2 things at once, then, she said finally. The resonance array interference to buy time, and a claim challenge. If we can make the case, we'll need to notify the conclave at some point. Probably when it's already done, I said. She almost smiled, almost. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. Yes. She stood up and straightened her jacket, a small, automatic gesture I'd seen her make before big moments. Get Declan, get Yosef, get everyone, we have work to do. I need to tell you about the resonance array, because it matters and because what Declan Foss did to get it working was one of the most technically impressive things I've ever witnessed. The resonance array maintenance terminal was located on Deck 17, in a section of the station that was technically non-restricted but practically unused. Nobody came to Deck 17 unless there was a maintenance issue flagged by the station's automated systems, and there hadn't been a flagged maintenance issue in 11 months. We got there at what my body clock said was around midnight, the station's white emergency lighting making everything feel flat and slightly dreamlike. Foss went to work on the terminal while Merman and I stood watch in the corridor, which was probably unnecessary but felt like the right thing to do. Watching Foss work was something else. She had this quality that I think only comes from decades of engineering under pressure, a kind of absolute economy of movement. No wasted gesture, no second guessing. Her hands moved across the terminal interface with the calm precision of someone who has done harder things than this and remembers every one of them. She navigated through the station's maintenance architecture, found the resonance array's operational control module, and started building the interference pattern. How long? I asked her at one point. Don't ask me that, she said without looking up. It's done when it's done. It was done in 47 minutes. She looked up from the terminal. It's running, passive interference, piggybacking on the array's standard diagnostic cycle. The station's own systems won't flag it as anomalous because it's within the noise parameters of a routine diagnostic. How long before the Thresh notice? If my reading of their signal validation protocol is right, they should start seeing degradation in the next couple of hours. But whether they interpret it as genuine interference or deliberate jamming, she shrugged, I can't predict that. All we need is for it to create uncertainty in their validation. Then we have about a 60 to 70% chance of it working, she said, which is better than the odds I had on a few other things I've done in my life. The claim challenge was harder, not technically, emotionally. Because Solis was right, it had to be real. It had to be something that actually cost something. We spent an hour in the observation bay, all 12 of us talking it through. Not arguing exactly, talking. The way humans do when something important needs to be decided and nobody wants to get it wrong. The crew included Solis and me, Foss and Merman, a young woman named Petra Vance who handled communications logistics, an older man named Saul Eddington, who was a retired military officer serving as security consultant, and 6 others, people I'd worked alongside for months, but am going to leave unnamed here because some of them have asked not to be publicly identified. Personal reasons. I respect that. Saul Eddington was the one who said it plainest. The Thresh need to see someone choose the group over themselves, he said. He was 61, built like someone who had once been very powerful and had maintained most of it. He had a voice that didn't rise or fall much, just carried. Not theoretically, not historically. Right now, in front of them with real stakes. The formal challenge would need to be transmitted directly to the Thresh vessel, Solis said. They'd need to assess the demonstration in real time. What counts as a demonstration? According to the precedent files, I said, the 3 species that attempted the challenge all tried different approaches. The first transmitted historical records of battlefield sacrifice. The second made a philosophical argument. The third sent a diplomatic delegation to the Thresh vessel to make the case in person. I paused. All 3 were rejected. Because none of them demonstrated anything live, Eddington said. They described it. Described it isn't the same as doing it. Silence. What if, Petra Vance said slowly, the demonstration was the transmission itself? Everyone looked at her. She was young, 26, maybe 27. She had the particular quality of very intelligent young people in high-pressure situations, which is that they occasionally say things with a quiet certainty that makes you realize they've been thinking several steps ahead while everyone else was still on step 1. Say that again, Solis said. The Thresh assess claim challenges. They evaluate whether a species demonstrates Veth Kala. They have to receive the challenge transmission and assess it. She paused. What if the act of transmitting the challenge, the fact of transmitting it, knowing the risk, with the whole station watching, and knowing that if the Thresh reject it, we've just identified ourselves as the humans who tried to interfere and failed? What if that itself is the demonstration? It's not self-sacrifice, Eddington said. It's self-exposure, she said. For the group. Right now, the conclave emergency session doesn't know what we're doing. If the Thresh receive a formal claim challenge from the human observers from species that doesn't even have a full seat at the table, and the Thresh reject it, we're not just expelled. We're the humans who made things worse during a crisis. Earth's observer status is gone, maybe permanently. She looked around at all of us. That's a real cost. We're risking something real, for the station, for everyone on it. She paused. Maybe that's what Veth Kala looks like for people who aren't in a position to pick up a weapon. Another long silence. Solis said, it's not enough on its own. No, Eddington agreed, but it might be part of it. They looked at each other. There's something else we could do, Eddington said. He said it carefully, like someone picking up something that might be fragile. Something that's a bit more concrete. I need to tell you about the Thresh vessel's approach corridor. When a Thresh vessel transmits a claim, it positions itself in what the files called an acquisition corridor, a specific approach vector to the target, optimized for the Thresh's particular method of taking physical possession of a structure. On Meridian 7, the acquisition corridor ran along the station's primary docking axis, the same axis used for all regular traffic in and out of the station. The corridor was currently empty. The Conclave had suspended all docking traffic the moment the Thresh claim was transmitted. Empty except for one thing. Our ship. The Earth Observer delegation had arrived on Meridian 7 in a small diplomatic courier vessel, a converted science ship called the Patience, which was Earth's way of trying to make a statement without saying anything directly. It was, by the standards of Conclave vessels, extremely small. It was, by Grovian standards, roughly equivalent to a maintenance drone. It had a crew of 4 and a top speed in standard space that the Grovian would have considered insulting. But it was there, sitting in the acquisition corridor. And under the docking protocols, only its crew could authorize it to move.